Kingston Penitentiary, Ontario, what Canada's toughest inmates ate before it closed. They had 96 hours before the kitchen became a crime scene. The food service manager didn't see it coming. Stay with this story. What happened in Canada's oldest maximum security prison revealed something that had been hiding in plain sight for decades. On September 26, 2013, 4 days before Kingston Penitentiary's permanent closure, Food Services manager Catherine Moore stood in the industrial kitchen reviewing the final week's meal plan. 178 years of operation, ending in 96 hours. The kitchen had fed thousands of Canada's most dangerous criminals. Murderers, gang leaders, violent offenders serving life sentences. But that week, something was different. At 8:47 a.m., Moore noticed an irregularity in the food inventory logs. The previous night's dinner service showed 412 inmates fed. Kingston Pen's official population on September 25, 408 inmates. For extra meals, unaccounted for. Moore checked with the head count officer. Population was 408 at last night's count. Confirmed. Then why does the kitchen show 412 meals served? The officer shrugged. Clerical error. Someone miscounted trays. At 10:30 a.m., Moore pulled the food service records from the past month. Every single day showed discrepancies. September 1st, 408 inmates, 411 meals served. September 8th, 407 inmates, 410 meals. September 15th, 409 inmates, 413 meals. Always 3 to 5 extra meals. Every day. For 4 weeks. At 11:45 a.m., she filed a report with the deputy warden. We have a pattern of unaccounted meals being prepared and distributed. I believe someone is receiving food who isn't on the official count. The response came at 1:15 p.m. Prison is closing in 4 days. This is likely administrative error during transition. No action required. At 2 p.m., Moore did something she'd never done in 18 years of corrections food service. She went to the kitchen during meal preparation and watched. The cooks prepared exactly what the meal plan specified. Standard portions. Standard count. But then she noticed something. After the main meal trays were assembled, the lead cook, a civilian employee named Gerald Marsh, prepared 4 additional trays. Same food. Same portions. But placed on a separate cart. Moore approached him. Gerald, what are those extra trays for? Marsh didn't look up. Special dietary. Medical orders. I didn't see any medical dietary requests in today's paperwork. They come through different channels. Security classification stuff. Above my pay grade. At 3:30 p.m., Moore checked with the medical unit. No special dietary orders for any inmate. No medical restrictions requiring separate meal preparation. At 4:15 p.m., she followed the cart with the extra trays. A correctional officer she didn't recognize, young, maybe 6 months on the job, wheeled it toward the administrative segregation unit. But he didn't go to segregation. He turned down a corridor that led to the old cell blocks. The ones that had been decommissioned in 2011. The ones that were supposed to be empty. At 5 p.m., Moore accessed the facility layout maps. The decommissioned north cell block had been closed for security renovations that were never completed. Official status, uninhabitable, sealed, no inmate access. But the food cart had gone directly there. At 6:30 p.m., she requested access to the north cell block from security. That area's restricted. Structural issues. No one goes in there. Someone just delivered food there 90 minutes ago. The security officer checked his logs. No entry recorded for north cell block today. I watched it happen. At 7:45 p.m., the warden authorized a security inspection of the north cell block. 3 officers. Full protective equipment. Body cameras. They entered the supposedly empty cell block at 8:20 p.m. The first tier was dark. Cells open. Empty. Exactly as expected for a decommissioned section. But on the second tier, they found something that stopped them cold. For cells. Locked from the outside. And inside those cells, 4 inmates. Living in a section of the prison that officially didn't exist. At 9 p.m., the inmates were removed and brought to interrogation. All 4 had been at Kingston Pen for over a year. All 4 appeared on the official population count. But their assigned cells, the ones they were supposed to be housed in, were occupied by other inmates. Somehow, 4 prisoners were existing in 2 places at once. Official records showed them in their assigned cells. But physically, they'd been living in the abandoned North Cellblock. At 10:30 p.m., investigators pulled the personnel files for the correctional officer who delivered the food. Officer Marcus Denton. Hired 8 months ago. Exemplary record. No disciplinary issues. But his background check showed something interesting. Before joining corrections, Denton worked as a civilian contractor. For a construction company. The same construction company that did the security renovations on the North Cellblock in 2011. The renovations that were never completed. At 11:45 p.m., they searched the North Cellblock more thoroughly. The 4 cells where the inmates had been living were modified. Reinforced locks. New bedding. Running water. Electrical outlets. Someone had made them habitable. Secretly. While the rest of the prison operated normally just floors away. At 12:30 a.m. on September 27th, investigators found the master key log. Access to the North Cellblock required a specific master key. Only 3 existed. 1 with the warden. 1 with the deputy warden. 1 with the head of facilities maintenance. The facilities maintenance key had been signed out on September 1st. Signed out by Gerald Marsh, the kitchen lead cook. The same person preparing the extra meals. At 1:15 a.m., they brought Marsh in for questioning. He admitted everything immediately. They paid me. I needed the money. I didn't think anyone would get hurt. Who paid you? I don't know names. Just a number to call. Instructions. Money deposited in my account. Instructions to do what? Keep 4 specific inmates hidden. Feed them. Make sure they stayed in the North Block. Until the prison closed. But when they checked which 4 inmates had been hidden, the 4 inmates were scheduled to be transferred to different prisons. But their transfer orders had been quietly cancelled. At 2 a.m. on September 27th, investigators pulled the transfer documentation. Inmate number 1, Raymond Pelletier. Serving life for first-degree murder. Transfer to Millhaven Institution scheduled for June 15, 2013. Cancelled June 14. Reason: administrative hold pending review. Inmate number 2, Marcus Whitford. 25 years for aggravated assault and weapons trafficking. Transfer to Collins Bay scheduled July 8. Cancelled July 7. Same reason. Inmate number 3, David Cree. Life sentence for gang-related murder. Transfer to Joyceville scheduled August 12. Cancelled August 11. Inmate number 4, James Nolan. 17 years for armed robbery and assault. Transfer to Bath Institution scheduled August 29. Cancelled August 28. For inmates. 4 cancelled transfers. All within 3 months. At 2:45 a.m., they discovered who had authorized the cancellations. Not the warden. Not the deputy warden. The authorization came through Correctional Service Canada's regional headquarters. Signed by Senior Classification Officer Robert Hennigan. At 3:30 a.m., they tried to contact Hennigan. No answer on his office line. No answer on his cell. His personnel file showed he'd taken vacation starting September 25. 2 days ago. The day the discrepancies in the meal count began appearing more obviously. At 4:15 a.m., CSC headquarters confirmed Hennigan hadn't shown up for scheduled meetings in the past week. His last confirmed location, Kingston, Ontario, near the penitentiary. But he hadn't been seen since September 24. At 5 a.m., they interviewed the 4 inmates individually. All gave the same story. They'd been approached separately in June by a correctional officer they didn't recognize. Told their transfers were being delayed. Told they'd be moved to temporary housing until the prison closed. Told to cooperate and they'd receive benefits at their new facilities. None of them questioned it. In corrections, you don't ask why when staff tell you to move. At 6:30 a.m., investigators reviewed security footage from June through September. The cameras in the North Cellblock had been disabled in 2011 when the section closed. But hallway cameras near the entrance showed Officer Marcus Denton making regular trips to that area, usually between 5 p.m. and 7 p.m., always with a food cart, for 3 months, every single day. At 7:45 a.m., they brought Denton in. He was more cooperative than Marsh. More scared. I was told it was an administrative housing reassignment. Temporary. I thought it was official. Who told you that? A guy from regional headquarters. He showed me the paperwork. Transfer holds. Special housing authorization. It all looked legitimate. What was his name? Robert Hennigan, Senior Classification Officer. At 8:30 a.m., they pulled Hennigan's financial records. 3 large deposits in the past 4 months. Total, $85,000. Source, numbered company. Untraceable without a warrant. At 9:15 a.m., the warrant was approved. By 10 a.m., they traced the company to a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. But the bank transfer routing showed the money originated in Canada. Specifically, Toronto. At 11 a.m., they made a connection. All 4 hidden inmates had one thing in common. They'd all testified in the same federal organized crime trial in 2011. The trial that took down a major drug trafficking network operating between Montreal and Toronto. 8 people convicted. Leaders sentenced to 20+ years. And every one of the Crown's key witnesses, including these 4 inmates who'd traded testimony for reduced sentences, had been transferred to Kingston Pen for their own protection. At 12:30 p.m., they contacted the RCMP Organized Crime Unit. We need to know if there are any threats against the witnesses from the 2011 Torres trafficking trial. The response came within 20 minutes. All 4 witnesses have been under monitoring. There's been chatter for 2 years about retaliation. But they're in maximum security. We assessed the threat as low. They were pulled out of general population and hidden in an abandoned cell block. Someone paid $85,000 to keep them isolated. Silence on the line. Isolated from who? At 1:45 p.m., they reviewed the transfer destinations. Millhaven, Collins Bay, Joyceville, Beth. For different institutions. All medium to maximum security. All with general inmate populations. All with known gang presence. The transfers would have scattered the 4 witnesses across different prisons. Where they be accessible? Vulnerable. At 2:30 p.m., the pattern became clear. Someone paid Robert Hennigan to cancel the transfers and hide the inmates in the decommissioned cell block. Not to kill them. To protect them. At 3 p.m., they found Hennigan. His car was parked at a hotel in Kingston. He was in his room. Alive. Unharmed. When our CMP officers knocked, he opened the door immediately. I've been waiting for you. At 3:45 p.m., Hennigan explained everything. In June, I received information that contracts had been put out on all 4 inmates. They were going to be killed at their new institutions. I couldn't let that happen. These men testified because we promised them protection. So you paid to keep them hidden? I used my own money. My retirement savings. I found people who would help. Marsh, Denton. I told them it was a classified witness protection operation. Why not report the threats through official channels? Hennigan's face darkened. Because the leak came from inside Correctional Service Canada. Someone in headquarters was feeding information to the Toronto organization. Transfer dates. Facility assignments. Cell locations. If I reported it officially, whoever was leaking would know, and the inmates would die before I could protect them. At 4:30 p.m., investigators verified Hennigan's claim. Our CMP cyber unit found encrypted communications between a CSC email account and known associates of the Torres trafficking network. The email account belonged to Administrative Coordinator Lisa Tremaine, CSC Regional Headquarters, Toronto. She'd been feeding transfer information for 18 months. At 5:15 p.m., Tremaine was arrested at her home. At 6 p.m., the full scope emerged. The plan was simple. Wait until the 4 witnesses were transferred to their new institutions, then have them killed in coordinated attacks made to look like inmate violence. With Kingston Pen closing, the transfers were inevitable. And when they reviewed the meal logs from the previous 2 years, they discovered the pattern had existed much longer than anyone realized, and the 4 inmates in the North Cell block weren't the only ones someone had been trying to protect. The meal discrepancies went back to February 2011. 29 months. Not 3. At 6 a.m. on September 28, forensic accountants analyzed Kingston Penitentiary's complete food service records from 2011 to 2013. The pattern was unmistakable. February 2011, 3 to 4 extra meals per day. March 2011, 5 to 6 extra meals. April through December 2011, consistent 4 extra meals daily. January 2012 through September 2013, same pattern. For meals. Every day. At 7:30 a.m., they cross-referenced the dates with inmate transfers. February 2011 was when the first witness from the Torres trial arrived at Kingston Pen. March 2011, second witness arrived. By April 2011, all 4 were in custody at Kingston. And immediately, the extra meals began. At 8:45 a.m., investigators made a disturbing realization. Robert Hennigan claimed he'd started the protection operation in June 2013 when he learned about the murder contracts. But the meal records showed the operation began in February 2011, 2 years before Hennigan got involved. At 9:30 a.m., they brought Hennigan back for questioning. You said you started protecting the inmates in June. But the food records show this started in 2011. Hennigan looked genuinely confused. That's impossible. I only learned about the threats in May 2013. Then who was feeding them for the previous 2 years? At 10:15 a.m., they re-interviewed Gerald Marsh, the kitchen cook. Gerald, you said someone contacted you in September to prepare extra meals. But the logs show you've been doing this since 2011. Marsh's face went pale. No. I only started in June. When that CSC official approached me. Which official? Robert Hennigan. At 11 a.m., they pulled the personnel records for every food service employee from 2011 to 2013. 3 kitchen staff members had worked continuously during that period. Gerald Marsh, who started the extra meals in June 2013, and 2 others, Assistant Cook Linda Morrison and Dietary Supervisor Frank Delacroix. At 11:45 a.m., they interviewed Morrison. She admitted immediately, I've been preparing extra meals since February 2011. I was told it was for administrative segregation. Special handling. I never questioned it. Who told you? Frank Delacroix. He said it came from the warden's office. At 12:30 p.m., they found Frank Delacroix in the staff cafeteria. He was 61 years old. 34 years in corrections food service. Scheduled to retire when Kingston Pen closed. When they brought him to the interview room, he didn't wait for questions. I knew you'd figure it out eventually. I'm glad it's over. At 1 p.m., Delacroix explained. In January 2011, I received a visitor. He didn't give me his name. But he knew things about my daughter. Where she worked. Her route home. He told me 4 inmates were coming to Kingston who needed to be protected. He told me exactly how to do it. Protected from whom? He didn't say. He just said if I didn't help, my daughter would be hurt. He paid me $2,000 a month. For 2.5 years. I used the North Cell block because I knew the renovation had been abandoned. I had keys from my time on the facilities committee. So you've been hiding those 4 inmates since 2011? Delacroix shook his head. Not the same 4. At 1:45 p.m., everything investigators thought they understood collapsed. Delacroix explained that the 4 inmates Robert Hennigan had been protecting since June 2013 weren't the original 4. In February 2011, 4 different inmates, all witnesses from the Torres trial, had been secretly moved to the North Cell block. But in March 2012, those 4 were quietly transferred out of Kingston Pen. And 4 new inmates took their place in the hidden cells. Different names. Different cases. But all connected to organized crime prosecutions. At 2:30 p.m., They identified the previous occupants. February 2011 to March 2012, 4 witnesses from the Torres trial, different from Hennigan's 4. March 2012 to August 2012, 3 witnesses from a separate Montreal gang prosecution, plus 1 from a human trafficking case. August 2012 to February 2013, 4 witnesses from various organized crime cases across Ontario and Quebec. February 2013 to June 2013, 2 witnesses from a biker gang trial, 1 from a money laundering case, 1 from a murder-for-hire prosecution. June 2013 to September 2013, the 4 inmates Hennigan protected, the ones just discovered. At 3:15 p.m., the pattern became clear. For nearly 3 years, someone had been using the abandoned North Cellblock at Kingston Pen as a safe house. A rotating protection program for witnesses whose lives were in danger, operating completely outside official channels. At 4 p.m., they traced the common thread. Every single witness who'd been hidden in the North Cellblock had testified in cases prosecuted by the same Crown Attorney, Michelle Beaumont, Federal Prosecution Service, Toronto. At 4:45 p.m., our CMP brought Beaumont in for questioning. She was 48 years old, 22 years as a federal prosecutor, specialized in organized crime. She admitted everything without hesitation. I've spent 2 decades putting away criminals who have unlimited resources and long memories. The official witness protection program has holes. I've seen 3 witnesses die because information got out. So I created an alternative. Using Kingston Penitentiary? Using the one place they'd never look. The witnesses were already in custody. Already protected by maximum security. I just needed to make sure they stayed isolated until their trials were over and the threats died down. How did you find Delacroix? I didn't. He was recruited by someone I trusted. Someone who understood what was at stake. Who? Beaumont hesitated. Warden Thomas McKay. The previous warden of Kingston Pen. He retired in 2012. At 5:30 p.m., they contacted retired Warden McKay. He confirmed it. Michelle came to me in 2010. She had 4 witnesses whose lives were in immediate danger. The system couldn't protect them. So we created a system that could. I brought in Delacroix because I trusted him. We kept it small. Contained. It worked for 18 months until I retired. Then who took over? No one officially. But Michelle found Robert Hennigan. A good man who understood the stakes. At 6:15 p.m., the investigation expanded. Over 29 months, at least 16 different witnesses had been protected in the North Cellblock. All had survived to testify. All had helped convict major organized crime figures. And all would have been killed if they'd remained in general population or been transferred to their assigned institutions. At 7 p.m., Correctional Service Canada faced an impossible situation. The operation was illegal, unauthorized, operated with falsified documents and coerced employees. It also had a perfect success rate. 0 witnesses killed. Multiple major convictions secured. At 8:30 p.m., the decision came from Ottawa. No criminal charges would be laid against Beaumont, McKay, Hennigan, or Delacroix. Administrative sanctions only. Retirement with reduced pensions. Professional censure. The operation would be classified. Never publicly disclosed. Official explanation. Routine security inspection before closure discovered administrative irregularities. At 9:45 p.m., Catherine Moore met with the investigators one final time. What happens to the 4 inmates now? They're being transferred to genuine protective custody. New identities within the system. The contracts on their lives are still active. And the meal discrepancies? Will be classified as accounting errors during the closure transition. Your report will be filed as resolved. Moore understood. The truth would be buried with Kingston Pen's closure. On September 30, 2013, Kingston Penitentiary closed permanently after 178 years of operation. The North Cellblock was demolished 6 months later during the site's conversion to a public museum. No trace remained of the 4 cells that had housed 16 witnesses. Frank Delacroix retired quietly. died in 2019. Never spoke about what he'd done. Michelle Beaumont resigned from the Federal Prosecution Service. Now teaches law at the University of Ottawa. Robert Hennigan took early retirement. Moved to British Columbia. Thomas McKay, the retired warden, died in 2016. His obituary mentioned his distinguished corrections career but nothing about Kingston Pen's most successful secret. The 16 witnesses scattered across Canada's prison system under new identities. As of 2024, all 16 are still alive. The organized crime figures they testified against remain in prison. But somewhere in Canada's corrections system, the same vulnerabilities that allowed the operation to exist still remain. Insider leaks. Transfer information accessible to those who know how to look. Witnesses whose protection depends on systems that can be compromised. And perhaps, in some other facility, another warden or prosecutor or food service manager is looking at meal counts that don't quite add up. Making the same impossible choice between following procedure and saving lives. This could happen again. Because the system still has the same gaps. The same leaks. The same impossible choice between official protocol and actual protection. Kingston Pen's North Cellblock is gone. But the need for places like it, for people willing to break rules to save lives, that hasn't changed at all. If this story shook you, the next one will be worse.